Okay, so hopefully you've already watched the video on how to divide with complex numbers. This video, I'm going to go through 3 examples. And so depending on what it is that you need from this video, you might choose to watch the whole thing, but you might skip to just the one part that you want and watch just that one part. So the 3 parts that I'm going to do, first I'm going to do an example where I do the whole thing using the double distribute method for multiplying our complex numbers. The second example, I'm going to do the whole thing using the FOIL method for multiplying our complex numbers. And then the third and final example, I'm going to do the top with the double distribute, and I'm going to do the bottom using this shortcut. All right, so that way you can see all 3 of those things in these examples here. Okay, correction. No, that's right. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, so with that said, sorry, confused myself there for a second. With that said, let's get started. Remember what we're doing here is we're talking about dividing complex numbers. We need to be able to find conjugates and we need to divide them. And of course, since we use the conjugate to divide them, we'll be reviewing both of those learning examples or learning objectives as we go through these examples. All right, so here's our first example. And then, like I said, in this first example, we're going to double distribute on both the top and the bottom in this example. Okay, double distribute on both the top and the bottom. So here we go. Suppose I have a 2 minus 3i, and I'm going to divide that by 4 minus I. Okay, so there we go. 2 minus 3i divided by 4 minus I. So we had 3 steps that we talked about in the previous video. As a quick reminder, here were our 3 steps. I'm just going to kind of leave this off to the side here as we do this so that we can reference them. But the first thing we want to do is find the denominator, which is the bottom number, right? Find the complex conjugate from the bottom number. So if my bottom number is 4 minus I, we said that all we want to do is change the sign that comes before the imaginary part. So in this case, that sign is a minus. I'm going to change it to a plus. So 4 plus I is going to be my conjugate. Now I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by that conjugate. So I'm going to multiply both the top and the bottom by this conjugate. All right, so I'm multiplying both the top and bottom. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not the conjugate, is it? The conjugate would have a plus sign in the middle. There we go. All right, so there we go. Now, the next thing is in the multiplication process. Remember, step 2 is going to be our longest step. This is where we're going to spend the vast majority of our time is on step 2, multiplying these things out. And so this is where I'm going to choose for this particular example to use double distribute as my method. So in the top, I'm distributing the first piece to both of the second pieces. And since I already have a plus sign there, no problem. Okay. You can see I'm also choosing to do this one just actually right within the problem and not use scratch paper. So I guess I'm also giving you that as an example instead of doing it off to the side on scratch paper. Of course, if I'm going to do that, I have to work with both at the same time. And some students really don't like working with both at the same time. Some students prefer to just do one and then just do the other. All right. So in that third example where I'm going to use double distribute again, in that third example, I'll do it in scratch paper. All right. So you can see that again as well. So here we go. Now I'm going to double distribute down here. So this thing multiplies by 4. Whoops, 4 minus I times 4. And then there's already a plus sign there, so I'm good to go. And then that thing, 4 minus I times I. Okay, so there is my first piece. Now I need to do the second half of my double distribute in the top. So 4 times 2 gives me 8. 4 times negative 3i is a negative 12i. I times 2 is a positive 2i. And I times negative 3 is a negative 3i squared. And then I also have to do my second half of the double distribute in the bottom. So 4 times 4, that gives me 16. 4 times negative I is a negative 4i. Over here, I times positive 4 is a positive 4i. And I times negative I is a negative I squared. So the next thing I'm going to do is deal with these two I squareds. So everything else in the top is going to stay the same right now. But this I squared is going to turn into a -1. So what this thing becomes is it becomes a -3 times a -1, right? Because I squared is equal to -1. And -3 times -1 is a +3. So that's what's going to end up right here as a +3. In the bottom, same idea. Everything stays the same except for the fact that I need to simplify this I squared. And so that I squared, we know, is going to be, whoops, sorry. Here's what I'm looking for. I can't grab it. There we go. Sorry, trying to change up the color and I couldn't grab my pen. There we go. So this I squared is really a minus, and then I squared becomes -1. So it's a -1. We can do change, and that becomes a +1. And so that's what's going to go down in the bottom is +1. All right. Now I combine all my like terms in the top. So for my real part, my like terms are 3 and 8. When I combine those, I get 11. And for my imaginary parts, I have a -12 and a +2. Those combine to give me a -10i. And the denominator, my real part is 16 and 1. So those combine to give me a 17. And then my imaginary part, a -4 and a +4, they're going to cancel. So I'm just simply left with 17, and that becomes my answer. Right? So this is our first example, going through the process using double distribute and doing it right in the problem. Okay. Now, remember, there is a step 3. If possible, I want to cancel my common factors. But remember, when we do that, all 3 numbers have to be divisible by the same common factor. And there is no number, except for 1, there is no number that will divide 11 and 10 and 17. And since there is no number that divides all 3 of them, that's it. I'm done. There's my answer. So there's example number 1, the double distribute example. Let's try example number 2. Now, in this example, I'm going to use the FOIL method that some of our students like to use. If you are somebody who doesn't like to use FOIL, then you can do one of 2 things. You can either just completely skip this example, or you can pause the video right now, do the whole thing with double distribute, and then once you've got the answer, skip to the end to see if your answer matches mine. Okay. But obviously our work will be different because you're doing double distribute and I'm doing FOIL. But if you are someone who likes to do FOIL, then here we go. We are going to do 5 plus 2i divided by 2 minus I. 5 plus 2i. Actually, I'm sorry, this is not just I, this is a 3i. Sorry about that. Okay, so 5 plus 2i divided by 2 minus 3i. And we still have our steps right here. Those steps haven't changed. It's just now when we get to step 2, we're going to use FOIL instead of double distribute. So step 1 is still find the complex conjugate. So go ahead and do that if you haven't already. You should end up with a 2 plus 3i. 2 plus 3i. So in step 2, I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom both by a 2 plus 3i. 2 plus 3i. But I'm going to do this using FOIL instead. So in the top, when I do FOIL, right, remember FOIL stands for first, inside, I'm sorry, first, outside, inside, last. First, outside, inside, last. That's our FOIL. So when I do my first, I'm going to do that with this particular color, whatever that color is. In the top, the first is a 5 and a 2. So there's my first, is 5 times 2. And that's going to give me 10. Then I'm going to do my outsides, or the outermost, whichever way your teacher taught you that. So my outside is 5 on this one and 3i on this one. So now I'm multiplying 5 times 3i. That's going to give me a positive 15i. Then I'm going to move to my inner, my insides, my innermost, whatever word your teacher taught you. So for my inners, that's a 2 and a 2i. Those are my inners, 2 and 2i. So 2i times 2 is going to give me a 4i. And then I jump back here to the end and I do my lasts. So for my lasts, I have 2i comes last here. And then 3i comes last there. So a 2i times a 3i will be a 6i squared. Okay. Now we have to go through and do the exact same thing in the bottom. So in the bottom, my first is 2 and 2. There's my first. So that gives me 4. My outside is 2 and 3i. There's my outside. So 2 times 3 is 6i. My inner is a negative 3i and a 2. There's my inner. So negative 3 times 2 is going to be negative 6i. And then I have my last, which is going to be 3i and 3i, but they have different signs. Negative 3i times positive 3i is going to give me a negative 9. I times I is I squared. All right, so there's my FOIL process. There's my FOIL process. Okay, so now we start simplifying. And as we've said, the first thing we're going to want to simplify is we're going to want to take these I squareds and switch them into negative 1. So I have a positive 6 times a negative 1 is what that I squared becomes. That's going to equal a negative 6. So everything else in the top stays the same. 10 plus 15i plus 4i. But this plus I squared is going to become a minus 6 is what that's going to become. Then in the bottom, all of this stuff stays the same. But this thing at the end, I have a negative 9 times I squared. The I squared is going to turn into a negative 1. So negative 9 times negative 1 becomes a positive 9. So that's what I end up with in the bottom. Oop, that was off the screen, wasn't it? Sorry about that. Okay, so there's my bottom. Right? Now I combine all my like terms. So in the top, I've got a 10 and a negative 6. They combine to give me 4. And a 15 and a positive 4, they combine to give me 19. In the bottom, 4 and 9 combine to give me 13. And positive 6i and negative 6i cancel. So I just end up with 13. Okay. I do a quick double check to see if I have common factors. So remember, for common factors, all 3 numbers have to be divisible by the same thing. And there is nothing that divides all 3 of them except for 1. And that doesn't really help. So I am done. That's my answer. 4 plus 19i divided by 13. That's my answer. Right? Last but not least, example number 3. And on this example, we're going to use our shortcut with double distribute. So we're going to double distribute on the top. And we're going to use the shortcut on the bottom. Okay. So if you're a FOIL person, when I do the double distribute part, you can go ahead and use FOIL and then just compare our answers. But everybody potentially might want to watch the shortcut part on the bottom to make sure that we're doing that the same way. All right, so here is our last problem. 2 plus 4i divided by 3 minus 4i. There we go. There's our last one. So in this last one, oh, I'm sorry, I wrote that down wrong. Again, I need to look more carefully as I write these down. That should be a plus sign. There we go. 2 plus 4i divided by 3 plus 4i. 2 plus 4i divided by 3 plus 4i. There we go. So here we go. Same steps. We're just going to change the way we do our multiplies. So first, I'm finding the complex conjugate. So pause the video real fast. What is the complex conjugate here? And write that down. All right, so hopefully you identified that as being a 3, and then the plus will turn into a minus 4i. So there's my complex conjugate in the bottom, 3 minus 4i. Okay, so I've got that. Now, I told you that this time, for the benefit of people who like to do this in scratch paper, I'm going to go ahead and do the multiplication of the top over here on scratch paper. So that keeps my fraction a little more clean. Okay, that's entirely up to you is where you want to do it. That's entirely up to you. But I'm going to keep my fraction a little more clean and do that on scratch paper this time. So I'm taking this whole first thing and distributing that into my second parentheses. So that gives me a 2 plus 4i times a 3. But now we've talked about many times that in that second part, I don't like to distribute to a negative. So I'm going to think of this as being plus -4, plus -4. So when I distribute that, that lets me put a plus sign in the middle. And then I have the first thing times a -4i, -4i. So I've made that change, plus a -4. Now I go through with my second distribute. So 3 times 2 gives me 6. 3 times 4i gives me 12i. And -4 times 2 gives me a -8i. -4 times +4 gives me a -16i squared. Now, as I clean that up, I know that this part here, -16 times I squared, the I squared can become a -1. So I end up with this turning into -16 times -1 becomes a +16. Okay, so I've got that. And last but not least, I combine my like terms. So 6 plus 16 is going to give me a total of, what is that going to give me? 22. And 12 minus 8 is going to give me 4. So there is my top. My top is going to become 22 plus 4i. And if you did that with FOIL, you should have gotten the same thing. All right, now 3 plus 4i times 3 minus 4i. This time I'm going to do it with this shortcut. And so the shortcut tells me that if, remember, first of all, you might want to recognize when can you use the shortcut. The only time you can use the shortcut is if you're multiplying conjugates. Everything is the same except for the sign in the middle. That's when we can use it. So the shortcut tells me, first, I'm just going to multiply the two numbers at the beginning. So 3 times 3, that's what I'm going to do first. And 3 times 3 is equal to 9. And then what I'm going to do is multiply the two numbers at the end. So 4i times a -4i. So 4 times 4 gives me a -16. I times I is I squared. Squared. Okay, now I do still need to simplify this like usual. So a -16 times I squared, that becomes, I'm looking at just this piece now, that becomes a -16 times a -1, which of course is equal to a +16. So we end up with a 9 and then plus 16, which is 25. 25. So my bottom is a 25. I do a quick double check to make sure that nothing cancels. Indeed, it is the case that nothing cancels. And as you can tell from these examples, that's usually the case. Usually it's the case that nothing cancels, but every once in a while something will. So you do need to check and make sure, but nothing canceled here. So we are all set. And that becomes my final answer. And I'm all done. So thanks for watching this second video with examples. I hope that you found them helpful. Have a good one.